It's official.
Who cares?
My name is Martin Selby. I'm in Todd Voss's Speech 176 class, and this is my informational speech. I will now present my audience members. First off,
My
please
name is
introduce
Claudia,
yourself.
and I am a friend of a friend.
Hi, my name is T. I was heading out on a bike ride and this just sounded really interesting.
I am Sarah. I live here.
My name is Garrick. I also am a homeowner and friend.
I'm Kadri, I'm a friend of Sarah's.
And the one family member is recording this, so not counting him as an audience member. Okay, so my name is Martin Selby, and today I'm going to be presenting on the subject of glazing within ceramics. Glazing is a fascinating and very diverse subject with endless potential for expressive artwork. These are two works of Phil Rogers, and these are salt-fired pieces, which are a style of glazing that I will be getting to later. Next slide, please. So before I dive into the different types of glazing that I'll be discussing today, which are low fire, high fire, and salt/soda firing your pottery, I am going to give a quick overview of what the components of a glaze are. First off, we have silica. Silica is present in all clays, and it can be added to the glaze itself, or it can be extracted from the clay that the piece is made out of. Silica, when it reaches above 3,000 degrees, melts and turns into glass essentially. Now, we also have fluxes. Fluxes are metallic oxides that can include potassium or sodium or lithium, just to name a few. And these lower the melting point of the silica so that we can fire them at temperatures closer to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit and actually get good glazes. Up in the top right-hand corner, we have alumina, and alumina is a chemical put in glazes to keep the melted glaze more stable in the pot so it doesn't just run off and completely wreck your entire kiln. Bottom right-hand corner, we have what are called colorants, which, as the name implies, color the glaze. This here is iron oxide. Iron oxide is used to turn pots red. You can have cobalt oxide to turn them blue, chromium oxide to turn them green, or cobalt, which can turn them green or red depending on oxidation or reduction. Next slide, please. Okay, so to begin, I will be talking about the broad category of low-fired pots. Before humans had the technology to fire kilns to above 2,000 degrees, they had to create low-fire work, which overall, in general, was not quite as durable, was more porous and less watertight than high fire ware, and tends to have a more rustic and earthy look to it. So this style here we have is called wood-fired pottery. As the name implies, the kiln is heated with wood. And some of these do not have glazes on them, whereas you can see in this particular image they have what's called a slip, which is just a watery clay substance colored with generally metallic oxides. So when the wood is fired in the kiln, what happens is the wood burns up, turns into ash, and the ash is flying around the kiln. And ash contains potassium carbonate, and in this particular case, the potassium will attach itself to the pot and create sort of a pseudo glaze with the silica, forming potassium silicate, which is a glass. Tends to be rougher in these cases and not as glossy and nice as you would see later or with modern low-fire pots like this. Next style we'll have is raku firing. Now, raku is a style where the pot is pulled out of the kiln while it's glowing red and probably in the ballpark of 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, safety practices on this vary a lot. At my high school, we would dress up in worn out firemen's outfits and be completely decked out. We would have fireproof visors and everything, and then we'd use a long pair of tongs to pull them out, put them into a trash can that had newspaper in it. The newspaper would ignite and the carbon would be used to reduce and color the glazes, which gives you these dark lines here, which aren't cracks but are are actually just colorations from carbon. Then you have people like this woman here who are somewhat covered, a little more dangerous. She's at least wearing glasses. And then on the far extreme end, you have people like the famous potter Paul Soldner, who lived in Colorado. A man I know named Damian Radis told me in an interview that Paul Soldner was notorious for doing things like having naked raku firings, where he would be running around with pots, putting them into piles of straw, no clothes on. Yeah, so he, a little less safe.
Not
Yeah.
recommended.
On the far right, we have Maiolica, which is a style of pottery originated in Majorca, one of the southern islands of Spain. And in Maiolica pottery, you have a very stable glaze painted over a piece or dipped over the piece, and then you can paint on with oxides. And this can allow for very tight design work or geometric work, as in this case, and that's because the glazes don't run whatsoever. In the center, we have an example of a modern low fire piece, which really is an attempt to imitate high fire work, and it has a looser, runnier, and glossier appearance than many other styles of low fire would have. Next slide, please. Okay, so as time went on, people discovered how they can get kilns hotter and hotter and hotter, whether that's through the use of better convection inside of a wood kiln, or the use of gas or propane or butane, just to name a few possible fuels. And these kilns generally would reach over 2,000 degrees, and what I'm going to consider high fire is anything over 2,300 degrees. Temperature inside of a high fire kiln is measured with pyrometric cones, which are these things on the right here. They're just little pyramids or rods of clay or another material that melt at a given temperature. So say these are for cone 8, these would be melting at 2,305 degrees. And more information about these can be found on a website reference for you. ShetfieldPottery.com if you have any interest in learning more about this. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of high fire work. As you'll notice, the glazes are glossier. These are more of a classic slipware type look, where slips would be used to color the pots and then they would be covered with a clear glaze. These are completely watertight, totally dish safe. They don't leach chemicals like some of the other styles, and overall tend to have higher levels of structural integrity. For these reasons and the added element of control that people can use for expressive purposes, many modern potters prefer high fire, despite the disadvantage of that you have to get a kiln a lot hotter. Next slide, please. Lastly, I'm going to be covering salt and soda fired pots. So salt and soda functions very similarly to other glazing styles chemically, the primary difference being that in a salt and soda firing, the chemical sodium is flying around in the kiln and physically attaches itself to the silica in the clay, creating sodium silicate, which is also a glass. So you don't actually have to glaze the pots, because the glass is being created from chemicals already present within the clay. In a completely raw clay, you would have something like this, which is considered to be orange peel, the visual orange peeling effect. And over here, we have an example of a slip and a little bit of an ash glaze over the pot. So the coloration is coming from chemicals within the clay itself. And these tend to have a very loose, gestural type of aesthetic to them. Also structurally very durable and safe to use. And there's a bit of an environmental debate over what type of glazing between salt and soda is more ethical, and that's because salt firing, you're physically putting salt into a kiln. When that breaks apart, sodium's attaching to the pots, chlorine gas is escaping through the top, which can be pretty bad for any plants or animals in the direct vicinity. It's basically mustard gas, which is all bad in World War I.
Cut to the chase.
Yeah, soda firing, which is soda ash or sodium carbonate, does the same thing, but you have CO2 coming out as the carbonate, which is CO3, breaks down in the kiln. This flies off, far less harmful, not as bad as driving your car even, no carbon monoxide in it. And next slide, please. For a quick image reference for how salt is put into a salt kiln, this is one firing that I took part in, and that's me in that photo. We wrapped up salt in 1 and 2 pound packages in newspaper, dipped them in water, shoved them into a 2,350 degree kiln, closed it up, let the magic happen there. Here are some more examples of salt and soda work. These are older, not as old as the oldest ones, which were probably from Germany between 12 and 1400. Most likely this happened because people were burning pickle barrels to get heat for the kiln and the salt. Did that.
I like the look of those.
So, in conclusion, what I hope you guys have learned is that there are many different styles of glazing, and that if you ever decide to look for your pots, this can be useful to know from the standpoint of having safe dishware, and that if you ever decide to make pots, if you understand that there's low fire, high fire, salt and soda, this serves as a good starting point from which you can search out more information and have an easier time creating your own ceramic work if you ever decide to do so. One last source of information, a lot of my information about glazing in this book came from the Potter's Hand Guide by Bernard Leach, who was an English potter in the early 20th century. Thank you.